Hello, Dr. Greer. Welcome. And I hope you had a great holiday with your family.
Hello, Pat, and thank you, and hope you did also, and everyone happy New Year and holidays. Hope everyone has a great 2024. It's going to be interesting, as they say. I think a lot of big changes in the next 12 months.
It would probably be better to say that, buckle up. Probably.
Buckle up, yes, indeed. Here we go.
Okay. So I think that this year-end disclosure update that we're going to do here really will help to answer the many, many questions that people have about the NDAA, what has
Mhm.
happened with it. And I think they'd love to hear your own opinion on some of the interviews and some of the news that has come out in mainstream media. There's
Mhm.
been a lot, and
Yeah.
people have tried to sift through this. It's impossible to figure out
Mhm.
what's true and what isn't. There's
Mhm.
all kinds of stuff being said out there. So,
Yes, and
um,
we've heard that. We've heard that personally
mhm,
from people like Tucker Carlson and members of Congress and other people from all walks of life who've contacted that we just don't know what to believe, who to trust, what's there. Because
right,
when people begin to look into this, here's the key thing: 90% of the information out there are like pre-positioned weapons of mass destruction from a psychological and psychological warfare point of view. And so, if you start looking into this with not a whole lot of background information, it's very easy to get diverted into the disinformation or false information as opposed to the information. It's a big problem. It's a problem I've been dealing with for over 30 years.
right,
December marks the 30th year anniversary of my book briefing, the first CIA director we did with Clinton. And 30 years on, I don't think a whole lot has changed in that regard, because what we call the fund of knowledge, the basic information that these leaders in Washington have, and certainly journalists and the general public, is an admixture of myth and information and deliberately proffered false information for its manipulative value. And that, I think, is the biggest problem that we saw in the 90s when I wrote the paper, When Disclosure Serves Secrecy, the secret agenda. So the very people who kept this secret, their agenda is always the one that's going to be pushed forward because they have assets embedded everywhere throughout media and government and elsewhere. And the result is that they end up putting out information that has a kernel of truth in it that's surrounded by a poison pill of disinformation. So it's sort of like a sweet coating on the outside that looks true, and then you take the poison. So that's something that's been developed since the 50s, as you all know from the CIA document we acquired after I briefed the CIA director about this, where in 1953 they talked about the great psychological warfare value of the UFO subject. So we're 70 years into those guys having a running start on what's now beginning to be just the disclosure concept that I founded in the 90s is now used in all in the mainstream media. It's called disclosure. You know,
right,
someone joked or sort of trademarked that. No, I'm just kidding. But that, unfortunately, we know that whether you're the president and you have someone come in with a portfolio of false information, or you're a journalist, you're going to first have the people shoved in your face who are counterintelligence, disinformation operatives, even though they may not come across that way initially. So it's a complicated problem, and it's why there is so much confusion and consternation and what have you.
right. So, can you discuss this NDAA and can you tell me or tell
Mhm.
our listeners what policies have changed towards this UAP research and transparency? Are they more transparent? And is
Yeah.
this going to impact people's future? What can we expect this year?
Well, to be honest with you, a great deal of the most important aspects of it was gutted by the conference committee between the Senate and the House. What the Senate passed was pretty aggressive. And the Senate Intelligence Committee and the folks I've been working with there, it came out of committee unanimously to put this amnesty or safe harbor period in so that individual and corporations would have 6 months to come clean. Then they'd be in violation of the law explicitly, et cetera. A lot of that was taken out. Now, there were other parts of it that were problematic that I think resulted in other parts of it being taken out. And we're going to get into something here very controversial, what I'm about to say.
Okay.
But there were some provisions in there modeled on the JFK Assassination Records Act, which was ballyhooed as a great step forward. In reality, the JFK Records Act resulted in the continued cover-up of the most sensitive information surrounding that event, and everyone knows that. And so the other problem with this is that there was going to be a 9-member panel appointed by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. And unfortunately, neither the people in Congress nor the White House, and I would say most of the UFO research community, don't know the history of these panels. The Robertson panel in 1953 was set up as an objective research project to look into the UFO issue. And it turned out, we have documents that state this, that Dr. Donald Menzel of Harvard and other people on that panel in a CIA document were on the payroll and were embedded to sort of skew the results and steer that panel into a dead end. The same thing happened a few years later, 1969, the Condon Committee with Professor Condon at University of Colorado. They were set up to get to the bottom of this. We have CIA documents. It's all going to be in the archive that all of you can read. These are official documents, not contested. Their provenance is not in doubt. And it states the key members of that panel, including Professor Condon himself, were on the payroll of the CIA and were actually operatives, but that had to be kept very secret. We have that document. And it turns out, as you know, from the Disclosure Project, initially, the group of witnesses that came forward in 2001, Dr. Robert Woods, who was a McDonnell Douglas aircraft, which of course that merged with Boeing. Mr. McDonald himself of McDonnell Douglas wanted him to look into the UFO issue. He did. He found all this hard evidence, and he was going to be on that committee with Professor Condon, the Condon Committee. And Professor Condon went to Mr. McDonald and told him to fire him, and he was kicked off that committee because he had actual evidence as opposed to the myth and the cover-up. So there's a problem with this, and this is, could there be 9 people that would be appointed by these bureaucrats and people in the government who would not be corrupted clandestinely? It's not like they're wearing a badge. Here's the naivete of the public. No one wears a badge saying, I'm a covert CIA operative, right? So these people, whether they're bribed or there's Oppo research on them, or they did something illegal that they can hold over them, or some personal problem, or money. I mean, all the above has been done to me and offered to me. And so what I see is that would have been very difficult, because it would have also been under top secret clearance, and then they could decide whatever they found, which parts the public would know and which parts they wouldn't. What that means is that there would be just pablum that probably proffered to the public and the media. Now, some people have said that I'm working with in the Senate that that's a rather cynical view, but I think it's because it's not cynical, it's realistic if you know the history. So if you don't know the history, you're going to repeat it. And unfortunately, the members of Congress who conceived of that, I don't think know this 70-year history of how this has been covered up, what the mechanisms are, and how those efforts have been corrupted. Therefore, the real action needs to be, and this is what we've been saying for 30 years, is an open, not classified hearings in the Senate and House, and a true investigation. Now, I will tell you, having worked for years now, very intimately with the most senior people in the House and the Senate, particularly the last 2 years, there's no real investigation going on because they haven't staffed that up yet. And when I first met with the senior officials on the Senate Intelligence Committee a couple years ago, the plan was they were going to put on a group with about 30 investigators to get to the bottom of this. And that funding and that process never began. They opened the AARO office, AARO, at the Pentagon. But that office also was conducting all of its debriefings of the whistleblowers we brought in a SCIF, secure compartmented information facility, top secret, where a lot of that was covered up and not sent back over to the members of the Congress. I know for a fact. How do I know that? listen carefully, everyone. We would bring people over to Washington. They would first meet with my trusted folks who are really the white hat good guys, Senate Intel, Senate Armed Services, et cetera. So they would get all that information from these whistleblowers first. Then they would drive them over to the SCIF or AARO or the Pentagon. And so they knew when that AARO office and Dr. Kirkpatrick was covering up the testimony and information given by some of the most important firsthand witnesses, which unfortunately, at this point, I can't name who all those were, but I'll just give everyone an example. None of you know who this guy is. It's a firsthand whistleblower, not like Mr. Grush, someone who's secondhand. And he was at Area 51 for years. He was actually in control of communication monitoring of all telephone conversations and everything in the very top secret S4 and other areas. He worked this issue for a number of years and also was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And what he shared, Dr. Kirkpatrick didn't want to hear, and then left it out of what he would then send up to even the top secret gang of 8 folks in the Congress. So that's why you saw last spring a rather strong letter from Senators Rubio and Senator Warner of Virginia that said point blank, it was sort of castigating the AARO office for having done that. Now, the reason they knew that had been done, we had made sure that they had that information independently. So it's a check and a balance. So that's what we've been doing. I know it's shocking to some people to hear this, but you have to. You cannot trust folks who are in these positions not to be corrupted or corruptible. Now, ultimately, the way to get around that is to do this and take it completely out of. And this is where I completely agree with Congressman Moskowitz. He's a Democrat from Miami, and Burchett, a Republican from Tennessee, Luna. It's across the spectrum in the House oversight where they realize they need to have an open hearing and they need to have subpoena power. And that is what we're now working with them on. And we just proffered and sent over to them a couple weeks ago before Christmas, 23 of the first really important top secret firsthand whistleblowers to be subpoenaed. And if they're subpoenaed, they're testifying under oath. If they lie, they can be prosecuted, and it gives them cover, more importantly. Most of them want to be sure they're giving cover and protection for coming forward. 2 weeks ago, we had a brand new Lieutenant Colonel Air Force retired who was at a very important Air Force base and dealt directly with the pilots and the aircraft that are the man-made UFOs that, of course, right now you have an army of ufologists going up there telling people that didn't exist, right? That's the biggest part of the cover-up. Heads up, everyone. It's not about the extraterrestrials, aliens. It's about what we have. Because those technologies disclosed would terminate the oil industry and the central utilities and all of that. It's hundreds of trillions of dollars. So I think that one of the problems is being sure that the people who are firsthand get subpoenaed and it's the correct people. But then there's another level, and that is what we've been spending a lot of time on behind the scenes is, and I'm not going to say who I'm doing this with, but like when there have been some of the earlier hearings, they'll contact me and ask me what questions to ask. The big problem, because I've been doing this now for 30 some years and have debriefed over 1,000, literally over 1,000 whistleblowers. You have to know enough to ask a follow-on to the follow-on to the follow-on question. It was complicated. In other words, you need to have a certain level of knowledge to even know what the next question would be, to be frank. I want to get into the weeds too far with this, but that's why there is a huge educational learning curve for members of Congress or White House who are incredibly busy with a million things, the Middle East blowing up, China, Russia, Ukraine, blah, 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 the economy. And so to get them up to date and up to speed correctly with information and not false information, very difficult to do and very time consuming. That's that's behind. Giving people a glimpse behind the scenes of what we're trying to do, and have been doing rather successfully. But it's a slow going, of course. Now, the other thing that's happening that happened in 2024, towards the very end of the year, there were. I'm sorry.
You mean 2023?
2023. Yes, I'm getting ahead of myself a year.
That's okay. You're almost there.
Yeah, hey man, I'm a man in a hurry, right? You know, I ain't getting no younger, girl. So, don't I know it? So, you know, I was thinking the other day, I was 34 when I started this disclosure effort, and now I'm 68, half my lifespan.
Wow.
But at any rate, what I think is very important for people to appreciate is the volume of information that's out there that we have versus the volume of disinformation that's the mythology. And the dominant paradigm is the mythology, right?
Right.
And so when they have these people go up there, they have a little bit of knowledge, all right? Let's say you're a secondhand witness or you're an operative, like Luis Elizondo. You're going to provide the information that the cover-up artists want them to provide, or you just simply don't know. And you find it unbelievable. And this is why some of the pilots, like David Fravor, whom I've spoken with, very sincerely believe that those objects he chased had to be from another dimension, another world, another planet, whatever, and that we couldn't possibly have something like that. And yet we have knowledge and proof that those were in fact from the Lockheed Skunk Works. Now, another update, in late September, I was taken by a classified helicopter and a very high-ranking person inside the secret deep black government programs to 2 black sites out west at very low altitude. And I have that video. I think you've seen some of it, including the opening to the underground facility at one of them that was run by the Lockheed Skunk Works Corporation and Boeing, which worked seamlessly, and another one that was Northrop Grumman. And it's a site that I know the most senior people in the Congress that we've handed this over to subsequent to this, and we have, had no idea existed. They didn't know the sites existed. They didn't know what was underground there. It's like an anthill where you go under, and then it's this huge complex underneath in the deserts out west. And this particular site had electromagnetic pulse weapons that, of course, an electromagnetic pulse is what you get from a nuclear blast, but just that pulse factor can be weaponized. Now, that's against the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but we have them. And of course, the organization doing this could care less about law, treaties, international law, et cetera. Who cares? If you're going to be rogue and break the law, you're going to break all of them, right?
Right.
So what has happened when I was over this site, I realized this gentleman is a senior operator there, very senior, who actually has handled the biologicals, meaning the dead bodies of the ETs, but also of the human pilots that we've killed that have accidentally strayed into that airspace during an operation that have been struck with these electromagnetic pulse weapons at both sites. The one site I was over, he said about 2 ET craft a year are knocked down there, and that he's been involved with retrieving and the OPSEC, operational security around it. He's extremely senior. And so it was kind of spooky because there was a security vehicle right by one of those as we descended right over the site, maybe 100, 200 feet, AGL, but ground level. But and the director of the law enforcement strike team that we've been providing information to is behind me and the back of the backseat of the chopper. But the purpose of this was for us to review this site, because besides the fact that they're targeting and knocking down the ET craft, and by accident, unfortunately, a civilian aircraft, and they just completely get rid of the fuselage and the bodies of these poor people who have been killed over this site. And that's something we're looking at opening up a major investigation and lawsuit over, because it's a lot of people over the years that have been killed. This one site's been fully operational for 40 years. and 40,
Wow.
40.
40.
And yeah, 40, and have on average killed about 2 ET craft and retrieved those victims during that period. So that's 80 crash retrievals just at one site. The other site, similar number. So when I tell people we have 122 crash retrieval cases, those are the ones that we have had people come forward and talk about. There's obviously probably more than 1,000 over the years, and I would say globally much more than that. Right. The other problem is that we found out that that same site, this operation, they have people who've been trained using very advanced technologies. And what I described in 1991 is consciousness-assisted technology, interface between thought, consciousness, and technology, to essentially hijack an ET vehicle, bring it into the area, and kill it. And this particular gentleman is handing over to us a couple of these operators that do that. Most of the people doing that are killed in the process of their training, but there are some alive, and a couple of them are coming forward. Now, that sounds like science fiction, but it's true. And this is part of the problem, is that the deeper you go into the subject, the rabbit hole just gets crazier. And the truth is way more unbelievable than the fiction being sold. Now, of course, all these senior folks who've approached us know about how they've been conducting abductions, making them look alien, what those technologies entail, how they've been doing and why they've been doing mutilations. We have a new whistleblower who's involved in that directly. It's very dark stuff, as Tucker Carlson recently said in an interview with someone. But he doesn't know that a lot of the stage crafting of the scariest stuff are covert human programs conducting them for their psychological warfare value, quote unquote, quote the CI document. But that's something we hope to clear up with Mr. Carlson soon, and some other journalists who have been gaslit by some false information.
Yeah, I mean, his comments, I don't know if you want to speak to any of his comments that are particular comments. You might want to, because they are out there in the public domain. And I think this has caused a great deal of confusion with the public and people who follow this, not just the public, but people in the government and law enforcement. It's serious.
Oh, it is. It totally is. But that's the intention.
Right.
It's not to bring clarity, it's to bring confusion. To hide and obfuscate with false information and false narratives. But the stagecraft, the staging of these false events is so well done. Right. You have very advanced aircraft that are anti-gravity, that are human. You have very advanced technologies of things that look like an alien that aren't. And then on top of it, there's been this deliberate conflation and confusion around extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional.
Right. And, it doesn't seem that it doesn't appear that he may be doing this on purpose. I just think he doesn't know at all. So,
no, he doesn't.
No.
Totally innocent. Totally innocent.
Right. Right. And he said he thinks that ETs have been here for forever, and that the U.S. government has made contact with them for some time, and that he finds this disturbing. Does he have proof of any of this? And if he does, what should he do with it?
Well, no, he's heard these accounts from secondhand, and that part of it's true. There have been ETs that have been around on the planet for probably longer than Homo sapiens, humans. There have been events that happened early on with contact, and then, of course, we ended up betraying those ETs back in the 50s. I always tell people, can you name a single treaty the U.S. government has done with anyone where they haven't betrayed it? I'd like to hear about it. Being, my grandmother's half Cherokee, Native American, asked them how that worked out with the Trail of Tears, where they were mostly the genocide of the Cherokee Nation. So I think one of the problems with this also is if you're a little bit of knowledge is a very extremely dangerous thing. I mean, I've said this now for most of 2023 because it was quite clear that there were people coming forward that had secondhand information and are just looking into the issue quite recently in the last few months, maybe last couple of years, like Mr. Grush, and it's very easy to lose your way through that wilderness that's been created deliberately. I think the other bigger problem is many of the events are not even the staged fake alien events. They're things from another dimension. And I was recently on a Twitter Spaces interview. I guess there were 50, 60 people listening.
Right.
And I went on it deliberately because it was a group that deals with all the reptilian, myth. And of course, no one on that understood the difference between an extra-dimensional, interdimensional being that is brought from another dimension, all right, which exists, and an extraterrestrial biological entity from another planet and star system. The problem, the reason it gets so confusing is why I encourage people to look on our YouTube channel here. We have a whole afternoon event talking about the cosmic structure and architecture and all these different phenomena and that get called phenomenon. All right, so there are multiple phenomena, plural, being called one thing, UAP, whatever. And that's bad, because what happens is that you have quite spooky, scary things that can be induced, let's say, brought forward from another dimension that aren't extraterrestrial, but sure would look like one and sure would confuse people. So now you have three things going on. You have the actual EBINs, extraterrestrial biological entities with actual spacecraft, but they travel when their technology allows them to go beyond the speed of light. But when they're even hovering somewhere over Earth, they can be shifted out of this dimension into another, and then pop back and forth. That's how they look like they materialize and dematerialize. So that technology is easily confused with, and let's call it a native extra-dimensional, or a being from another dimension that's not an ET from another planet, because there's some overlap in the phenomenological way that they would appear, what you would see and experience. So then you have, of course, the man-made, completely man-made, fake aliens, fake UFOs, or man-made UFOs. And all of that gets thrown into sort of a blender and gets mixed around in people's heads as they first begin to look into this. So this cacophony and confusion is completely understandable. It just has, it requires corrective knowledge and information, which is what we're trying to do. But it's difficult because the weight of the zeitgeist out there, let's call it, is all into the spooky stuff that then commingles it with the actual extraterrestrial. And if you don't know to make I always have used this analogy. I'm a doctor, so let's say someone comes in with chest pain. If you think everyone appearing with chest pain in my emergency department is having a heart attack, you're going to miss 100 other diagnoses: pulmonary embolus, dissecting thoracic aneurysm, pleurisy, pneumonia, blah, 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 blah. Like a whole list I could go on all day. Now, that's unfortunately what's going on with this subject. And that's called a differential diagnosis. In other words, you have to have enough knowledge of what the signs and symptoms and findings would be for any given reality, what it is. In this case, that's not happened yet. It's all clumped together, and there's no discernment. There's no parsing it out. And that makes it very easy then to gaslight and confuse people with scary narratives, where you can confuse the ET issue and the, let's call it, the native extraterrestrial craft and people with the man-made ones that are staged with the extra-dimensional, interdimensional phenomenon, which is also very real, by the way, absolutely real. And so that's the biggest crux of the confusion that people like Mr. Carlson or these senators and congressmen run into. And then they throw their hands up and go, we don't know what to believe. We don't know who to believe. And it becomes very difficult at that point, because you have to spend a great deal of time to go through the data and learn basically a new paradigm of understanding the cosmos dealing with dimensions of the worlds. And the big paradigm buster is what illegal secret government programs have. And this is greatly underestimated by the UFO subculture, the media, and Congress. Whatever you think we humans have, it's 100 times more unbelievable. And so that creates its own problem, because it means that the ability to false flag, hoax, stage things that to any reasonable person, I'm saying reasonable person, would believe was alien or extraterrestrial, is quite well developed. And that's unfortunately one of the big challenges of the disclosure effort.
Yeah, well, they have, I think, we've talked about this before, this idea of dimensionality with different
Mhm.
beings and different,
Right.
like whatever they are. The government, I mean, this illegal black ops also has that capability of
Oh, yeah.
dimensional travel that
Yeah.
people would say, oh, no, 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 that can't be real. That
Mhm.
sounds like myth or science fiction. But as we all know,
Mhm.
this is
Right.
is real.
Well, I've dealt with at least 3, maybe 4 separate covert technology teams that have had very high voltage toroidal donut-shaped systems that at certain frequencies will bring into this dimension, 3D, some really scary thing like a demon or something terrifying from another dimension,
Right.
extra dimensional. It's not extraterrestrial. And so this gets into a very, big problem where we have a big catching up to do in our basic understanding of the architecture of the cosmos, what I call the new cosmology. And that's why in, I believe, 1990 or 91, I wrote a paper called ETs and the New Cosmology. That how do you understand the ET phenomenon when there are these other things going on, and how do you discern and just make a distinction? Now,
Right.
30 some years later, of course, most people haven't read that, but it's controversial. Any new information is always controversial, which I accept. That's fine. I don't have any problem with it. But we're really going to have to focus on that more and more than people would like to, because this simplistic, naive, everything that goes bump in the night is an alien business is that's got to stop pretty quickly. Now, the best way for that to happen, again, 2 things: open hearings where people who have knowledge of this are put under oath and subpoena and they talk about it. All right. And number 2, law enforcement going in and seizing those assets that are being used criminally and standing them down. And I've said this before, there needs to be, everyone's been focused on the NDAA and this bill and that bill. That's great. And I've been there helping with that and been suggesting. I actually was the first person to suggest to the Senate Intelligence Committee people to put this amnesty provision in back a couple years ago. And initially they didn't want to. And if they did, they thought, well, we'll do 18 months, and they did 6 months. But it didn't come out of committee between the House and the Senate Conference Committee. But maybe it will next year. The point I'm making is all of that process has to go along with people understand what it is that you're trying to investigate. Which phenomenon are you investigating? And so that's where it gets more and more and more complicated for the members. And the only way to clarify it would be to bring forward people who, number one, have dealt with both, or one or the other. Maybe one person dealt with the ET, another person dealt with the man-made, another person dealt with the stagecraft of staging the mutilations and abductions, who come forward, who are whistleblowers. But then the other part, it would be for law enforcement to actually go in and seize these assets because they're just simply enforcing existing law. You don't have to pass a new law. They're on the books. I mean, there are any number of laws against abducting people, torturing people, mutilating people's private livestock, kidnapping, embezzlement of government funds, illegal black budget operations, on and on and on. So, there's dozens of felonies that are already on the books of the federal and state and local governments, for that matter, that are being violated. So in that sense, what you really need is a three-prong approach, and this is what we're doing. One, open hearings under subpoena in Congress, not in a skiff. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a minute. Remind me too about how that's been messed up, all right, in the last 6 months. The second would be law enforcement, where they go in and there's a knock on the door and it's polite, then it's not polite, and they come in. It is like a SWAT team. That needs to happen, because otherwise you're not going to be able to get these assets under control, but also to show them to the Congress and the White House and the public, which is the intention of the law enforcement team that we've been having briefings with and giving them the information they need from our archive, from the intelligence collection we have of 147 black sites that we've collected. And now the other part of it is then the third prong, and there's, I won't say who it is because these are still in negotiations. There's a major law firm that sued one of the giant corporations and won about $2 billion, Dragon Slayers. And they've approached, well, one of the partners saw me in the airport at LAX, basically, and approached and said, you know, we had a conversation, and I talked about our legal disclosure project effort, and this person offered the firms resources to do this. So that's something in 2024 to look for. We'll see how far that goes, because we have a number of cases that can be opened and put through federal court. That would provide another way you could go to discovery if there was a cooperating federal judge, if he's not corrupt, would then allow for site investigations, depositions, discovery, and it would rock these large corporate entities on their heels, because now we're talking much bigger than a $2 billion lawsuit. You know, there's a lot of zeros after that for what they've done and what they've taken from the world and the people, these free energy devices, all of it. We have the former chairman of a major Fortune 100 company that's come forward and is admitted he has the documents and the proof this company had, quote, free energy that would save the planet and eliminate poverty. But he has to be subpoenaed. So he can be subpoenaed in Congress, but you could also do it through a private civilian series of suits.
And
so that's the third. That's the third approach,
right? They want to be subpoenaed because doesn't that kind of jump over their NDAs in some way?
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Their non-disclosure agreements, whether it's corporate or government, have already been nullified. And luckily, there's a man I've been working with for about a year who did not want to come forward unless he spoke in a SCIF, a top secret secure compartment information facility, which is where you exchange top secret code name level information. And I've been in those. Now, what's interesting is that he's now come around and understood. It took about 9 months for him to get to really see the proof that his non-disclosure agreement is nullified, because the operation he was working under on this particular issue was a criminal enterprise, not overseen and approved by the Congress or the president. So now that he knows that, he's willing to come forward and give testimony. So for many of these men and women, it's a process. Oh, and you remember the hearings this past summer when Mr. Grush said, "Oh, I can talk about that. It needs to be in a SCIF." Not true. Right. What I'm telling now the members of the House Oversight Committee is that I'm glad you were denied a SCIF, because you should not be conducting this business in a SCIF. This should be in an open hearing on C-SPAN and on the news networks. We should afford that organization no cover of national security, none, unless they come clean and rejoin the legal processes that our Constitution requires. So remember, in the 1990s, between 1992 and 1998, I had met with enough senior people at the Pentagon, generals, admirals, people in Congress, senators, congressmen, White House people, CI directors, etc. And it was made quite clear to me that these projects were being run without oversight and supervision, and therefore unconstitutional, and up to and including threatening senior officials if they made inquiries, literally threatening them. So you can't behave like a mafia, illegal organization, and then hide behind the law to enforce the secrecy. This, what I just said here, everyone needs to transcribe it and write it to their members of Congress. They cannot and should not afford that effort, the dignity and the stature of a top secret clearance or any clearance. So this is why it needs to be brought straight out, the information. Now, caveat, the operational technology and designs of the things that fly that we have, those should be very secret. And people are going to hate when they hear me say this. The energy devices that would run your house and car, great. The things that fly at a couple 100,000 miles per hour, you do not want an unstable country or a terrorist organization to get that, because in 2 seconds they could deliver a weapon over downtown LA or DC or New York or whatever. So there are legitimate concerns, but let's face it, we all know we have thermonuclear weapons. You can't go to Ace Hardware and buy one or build one, right? So some of this needs to be looked at in a more nuanced, and I would say mature way. Right now, see, that hasn't happened yet. The distinction between the information and the existence of these technologies and craft coming out versus the actual technologies. The actual technologies need to be brought out in phases. And the first phase, which is what we've been recommending for 30 years, are the devices that are 0 point, quantum vacuum, whatever you want to call them, like we presented in the Lost Century film, that would put in a system for the world that would eliminate pollution and stop the damage to the environment, but also eliminate poverty in about 20 years. So those can come out 100 years ago. Those should have been out in the time of Nikola Tesla. I mean, the real Tesla technologies, not the current fake ones. But so that is something very, very important to make that distinction. And I say this because I have to have sort of very reasoned conversations with members of Congress that I'm meeting with, but also people in special forces, law enforcement. I mean, this is serious. This is not, UFO club, Google it on the internet. I mean, it's very serious responsibility. And I'm very blunt about the fact that not everything technological can spill out in the first period. But the knowledge of their existence needs to. And we certainly can't keep covering up the existence of the ET craft and people and targeting them and destroying them. But we also can't keep the covert programs using illegally, clandestinely, the man-made UFOs, which have been used in horrific, murdering entire villages in Africa and South America. And the CI document that 𝗷𝗍𝗍 has, where he outlines, in 1985, the CIA document that says they were down in Brazil and Argentina abducting peasants, quote unquote, for their psychological warfare value, making it look completely alien with man-made alien-looking craft and creatures. Now, that is an official document that we know exists because 𝗷𝗍𝗍 and a couple other people I know have it, but they haven't turned it over publicly yet. But that can be subpoenaed, see? So in a court case or in the Congress, here's a subpoena. You produce this document. So we have outlined all this. It's a very complex. I understand that in the new year, 2024, there will be more hearings. And I'm trying to get them ready with the correct witnesses teed up, but also the correct questions and follow-on questions. And then most importantly, the right approach. The wrong approach would be say, we can hear about this openly, but this we have to go into a skiff. No. Close the skiff. That time's got to be over.
So the only thing that, when you're talking about transparency and bringing this knowledge out in open public hearings rather than a skiff,
Right.
your
Right.
feeling is really the only thing that would be appropriate to do in a skiff
Mhm.
would be something that has to do with electrogravitics.
Yeah. So the sort of very advanced technologies, how they're made, what their design is, that could be used as a weapon, right?
Right.
That's different than the information. A thermonuclear device is a weapon, right? But not everyone can possess one, and Rhode Island can't build its own nuclear weapon, so it can fight off Boston or something stupid, right? So I mean, so the truth of the matter is,
Awesome.
I'm being silly, but I mean, you have to have some sort of reasonable criteria. But if you don't even know what's what, in other words, you're dealing right now. This is where the people who are in the senior reaches of the aerospace and intelligence community that are currently in those positions, who've reached out, they're very frustrated with the slow pace of this in Congress. So it's to be determined, TBD, whether the legal approach we're going to take in a court case would bring this information out before Congress would, or before law enforcement organizes and says, we've sat around all we're going to. We have enough actionable intelligence to move on these facilities, and we're going to move.
Yeah.
So those are three big initiatives that we're heading up and assisting with. I'm
Definitely.
not, of
Yeah.
course, I'm not law enforcement, but when I was approached by the director of the law enforcement initiative in April, if I would help them, because they had no knowledge of where assets were, I said, what do you want? He said, we want everything. I said, my friend, that's going to be a lot. And they're getting everything. And then this lets me pivot to something even more current. You all heard that we have the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive. I think you can testify to the fact when you were here for a couple of weeks helping scan stuff in, there's some mind-blowing stuff in there. Yeah. It's
I
unbelievable.
literally had to go outside and take a couple deep breaths a couple of times. I mean, this is going to be where people do need to buckle. But it needs to come out.
Yeah. So I'm just giving this as a warning to people listening. This is going to come out early next year. We are spending $400,000 or $500,000 to move all electronic files into digital, and all documents and testimony into digital, that are now in a custom designed searchable database with major categories. We've been able to compress the videos and the audio files through a technology. So instead of it being 50 terabytes, we can keep it under a terabyte. And by doing so, we'll be able to put it and host it so that we wouldn't have to be spending enormous amounts of money so the public could access it. Because as you know, this is a big problem. It's the cost of that. We don't have, the Rockefeller and Ford foundations and the government are not supporting this. This is all our own effort. But it will then have an interface. So if you look at a database that would have all that content you saw, or some of it you saw, there would be an interface between that database that's being custom built to the World Wide Web. And what we need, if there's anyone who can do this in 30 days, is a website developer. It'd be more like a landing page that we could have that up, and that would connect to this system. I'm not an internet technology guy, but that would then give free access to the entire archive to 8 billion people on the planet. And I will say this is a rather bold statement. That dump of data and information is the disclosure. It is everything. It's every site. It's hundreds of top secret witnesses. It's hundreds of thousands of pages of government documents and transcripts of testimony and technology and black budget proof. And it's 122 crash retrievals and named people and sites and on and on and on and on and on. So it's not finished. We wanted it finished by now, but it's a big project and technically challenging in some ways. I won't get into the sausage making of that nightmare, but it's a big undertaking. But it will be available. Now, the only thing that the public won't see, those of you who are curious, are the redacted names of people, their social security numbers and their email addresses, if they're a top secret witness or an individual that doesn't want to be known by the public, but has wanted us to have the information. So this is a little bit like the Chatham House rules at secret meetings. You know, Chatham House is a think tank in London or in the UK, where you can cite the information someone shares, but not the name of the person. So my ethics is that if someone has said, I want you to have this information, I don't mind if the world has it, but I don't want my name out there because I'm scared for my family, or I don't want a bunch of UFO kooks banging my door down, or whatever it is. So I honor those requests. So that is the redacted. Now the full unredacted, which is very sensitive and very top secret, that is being provided to the key investigators, the law enforcement, and the senior people in Congress. All of it. No, nothing's held back. So look forward to that. And I had hoped we would have the whole thing out December 1st. It looks like it may be more later in the winter. The big hangup is going to be who can build this landing page website for us quickly, like in the next 30 days. And the team that's been working on the database are not web developers, but they can get someone. So there's a bit of a kerfuffle with that. It's like we're at the 99-yard line and we need one more yard to carry it across. Otherwise, the public will have no portal, right? You need to have a portal into this thing. Right. Anyway, so, and I don't know the first thing about making a website. And we don't have anyone on our team who does. Nobody knows how to build a website. So if someone's expert at that and can do it quickly and either for free or reasonably, let us know, like 3 months ago.
There are people out there who know how to do this, and once they hear this, I think you'll have a lot of hands coming up. So hopefully
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see. Right.
Okay, so one other thing I want to ask you about with Tucker Carlson, he believes that there is a spiritual. He's mentioned that he believes that and he's not the only one. Obviously, there are many people who speak about this topic and this subject that understand that some understand, some don't, that there is a spiritual component that is involved with these beings and with contact experiences and going forward. Can you speak? I don't know anyone else in the world who can speak about this with the expertise and knowledge that you have. So can you speak about that a little bit for us?
Sure. I mean, and again, it sort of recapitulates what we started with. I tell this funny story back in the 90s, being at the Vatican with Monsignor Balducci, who is a theologian, senior theologian to Pope John Paul. And he was actually a demonologist, interestingly. And of course, not my cup of tea, all that, but I mean, we had a very long interview. And he said, the extraterrestrials are neither demons nor angels. However, they're not hostile and they're so advanced that they could be confused with angels. On the other hand, the extra-dimensional phenomenon would be more like the demons, and those get conflated all the time with extraterrestrial. And the man-made atrocities being done that look alien definitely look like a negative entity from somewhere. So you have all of that happening. Now, he emphatically said, because then he had access at the Vatican all the way to the Pope, and he introduced me to the Vatican astronomer and everything. And so he understood the cosmology quite well and knew the difference between an angel, a demon, an ET, and something that would be concocted out of the skunk works or what have you, covert program. But that is a very advanced understanding. But so spiritually, the ET, the actual, let's call it native ET, real extraterrestrial, all of them are so advanced that they would appear to be unimaginable in their evolution. And there is a deep spiritual component to it, simply because once a civilization has free energy and abundance, and it's no longer fighting over a scrap of land here and a piece of gold there, the whole civilization pivots towards the development of their spiritual higher states of consciousness. And so they're very interested in humans and in that component. And that's why the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, the CE5 Contact, if you get the app CE5 Contact, you'll see it's very rooted in this understanding of consciousness universality and how that operates through not only making contact, but also advanced technologies. The extraterrestrial technologies seamlessly interface with consciousness, field, and thought. And so that part of it, when people encounter it without an understanding of non-locality, of the physics of entanglement, of the physics of the entanglement of consciousness and thought, and omnipresence of consciousness, all those concepts, it's going to be very confusing, because, and you're going to then also conflate some of the extraterrestrial phenomenon and experiences people have with something from an angelic realm, because some of them, you have entire planets out there that on the level of consciousness, they are basically have evolved to the level of a very higher level of consciousness. And so they would present as these very enlightened spiritual beings, even if they have a body in a spacecraft from a star system in the Andromeda galaxy. So this gets where you have to have this comprehensive assessment and overview that integrates what's normally very separate things that never get put together, and that's science, spirituality, religion, consciousness studies, and advanced physics, the cutting edge of entanglement and AI and all of this. So that's something that requires a deep study and understanding of this in order not to be completely discombobulated and confused. And so he's quite right that there is a spiritual component. But again, which is it? Is it actually a spiritual being, man-made phenomenon, an extraterrestrial advanced civilization whose consciousness might be on parity with a celestial level of consciousness? All of that has to be understood, and then that goes into your analysis whenever you encounter a phenomenon, a case, an encounter. What is it? Is it X, Y, or Z, or something else? So again, without that sort of knowledge and study, everyone's going to be hopelessly confused, unfortunately. And this is not that difficult. I think we can articulate that as briefly as I just did.
I agree.
But it needs to be discussed, but it makes people uncomfortable, because if you're a scientist, you're not comfortable with that. If you're a theologian, you're not conversant with science. If you're a policy academic or political person, all of that is just completely foreign, mostly to those folks. So we kind of have to create a common ground for all that. And so, and that's what we've tried to do, because as you know, we have these three big foundations of what we're doing: the Disclosure Project, the CE5 Contact with development of higher consciousness, and then the technology, the effort to bring out these zero-point free technologies. Those are the three big projects that we've been moving forward over the last 30 years. So I think that's why that knowledge, it says in the Vedas, and the ancient Vedas in India, knowledge is the greatest purifier. If you have the knowledge, it clarifies and purifies this understanding. If you don't, it's very easy to mix it all together in this mixer bowl of stuff. And that's what we need to try to bring clarity to. Hopefully, the archive will also have a CE5 part of it. And eventually. Right now, it's dealing mostly with the nuts and bolts and the documents and the witnesses and the sites and all that. But there's a great deal, as you know, that the public has never seen on the CE5 experience. Right. I mean, there's enormous photos, videos, accounts, testimonies, and that would be included, eventually.
It's too bad also that we can't come up with some kind of common language and terminology because each one of these groups that you have mentioned, physicists, the academia,
Mhm,
the public, the scientists,
mhm.
they all use different terminology. And some of the terminology is so above the heads of the common person
Right.
that their eyes start to glass over and you
Of
realize that
course. Yeah.
unless people start speaking in simpler terms, right? Simple
Mhm.
terms that everyone can understand, we leave so many behind and then people get confused.
Well, if people look at my books, I've created a lexicon and descriptions that do that.
You have.
Very much so. And I'm aware this is a problem. I was a meditation teacher before I was a medical doctor. So I understand how you have to create a common language, but then if you're going to use a term, you describe it. All right. And you define it. And this is important. Words do matter. And words are a reflection of the thought, which is a reflection of the consciousness and meaning behind it. And so that is important. And these are all things that are going to get more and more defined as this goes forward. The problem is, I think the timeline's getting very short. I'm not trying to sound ominous.
Right.
I don't think there's 30 more years or 80 more years to fool around as things have been going. For one thing, the betrayal of the ETs by our covert illegal secret government is not going to be allowed to go on much longer. And if we don't fix it, there are forces out there in space that will, which is a worst case scenario. I want to repeat it. It's a worst case scenario. Everyone asks, why don't the ETs just come and fix all this? Oh, no, you don't want that under any circumstances. So we need to take the lead. Humans who understand this need to take the lead. And to do that, we need to have certain segments of society get up to speed very quickly, which is one of the reasons for this disclosure project, Intelligence Archive, being online and everyone seeing it, because there it is. I mean, and it is going to be, a lot of it's going to be very shocking to the public. Very.
Very.
Yeah, it
If
is.
I
Yeah.
if I can be shocked, and I've been involved in this
Mhm.
for years,
Mhm.
I can tell you that it definitely will be a buckle up journey.
That's why I haven't released a lot of it. It's
I know,
disturbing,
I know.
the things that these covert programs have done, the murders, the testimony of so many of these whistleblowers that no one has ever seen. Um, and remember, in the archive, you're going to see the redacted, not the people who've come forward that have given us permission to use their name, but the other 650. The names are redacted, but there'll be a little blurb and then a file of what they've written and what notes we've made about what they've shared, right? Now, I know who all those people are, all 755 of them, all right, that are in that list. And you'll see the list. You'll also see all the black sites, the map and the sites, as well as now the big job. Now, I just want to warn everyone, this archive is going to be kind of raw data, right? That's searchable. It's a database. What I still have to create is to triage. So let's say you have, I don't know, 200,000 pages of government documents. No one's going to read 200,000 pages of government documents. What we need to do is triage the most important to the least, right? That takes time. Same thing for the crash retrieval cases. Same thing for the witnesses. That there are more important witnesses that dealt over a period of time directly, and there are others who just had an incidental encounter, like the pilots who encountered the Tic Tac, right? That's just a chance encounter versus someone who was read in and worked in an underground base. So the witnesses themselves have to be triaged. And then the crash retrieval cases, as well as the major cases and the radar all of these categories have to be, and that has not started yet.
Right.
All right. Just
Well,
warning everyone. I'm warning. I'm a doctor who always gives full information. I don't hide information. I don't tell you nonsense. So it's going to be put out there at that stage. Now, the bigger part of it after that's done is what I call the briefing modules.
I was
How do
just
you
gonna
make,
ask.
okay, and we're going to do something. Heads up, everyone, get on a list, contact Pat. We're going to have a select number, maybe 20 people at our retreat center this winter, where all we're going to do is go through all this deep, deep stuff, and I'm going to create the archive modules. And what those briefings are is connecting the dots across all categories of the most important cases that then reach the intelligence assessment. So these would be the most important things in the archive, and they're not even created yet. I've got to create those. But we're going to have a week event to bring in more of that. We already have a few law enforcement and special forces people asked me to create some critical ones, and those will be in there, but redacted heavily because it's extremely sensitive, and frankly, it scare the crap out of everyone who read them. But frankly, but you know, it needs to be done. Otherwise, you have all these huge amount of data that no one's going to be able to sift through without an assessment that connects all those dots. But
Yeah,
that is,
that's it. The connecting of the dots and really only
yep.
I don't know anyone else who can do that but you, to really succinctly connect those dots
Mhm.
for people, because that is where the real understanding of this information will come in.
Right. So visualize this. You open the archive, there would be the categories, and then there would be sort of an introductory briefing analysis that would connect all the dots within that and triaged, but also connecting to other categories with a hot link, so where it's all interconnected. So that the intricacy and that analysis and that work hasn't started, but we want the public to have the raw data. We've been rushing to get that, and also I need to get it in this form so that the investigators with the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services and the House Oversight Committee would have a tool. So look at what we're doing with this. The DPIA, the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, would be like Wikipedia for all things UFO related.
It's going to be massive.
And we're
Yeah.
inviting other people to submit more material. We don't pretend that we have everything on planet Earth by any means, but what we do have, you'll have access to, which no one in the world has ever seen, except a few people who crawled through my archive here at our place. But so that'll be an exciting development. It's an ongoing project, really. So in next month, we're going to launch a crowdfunding site for the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive. We're going to set the initial goal around 500,000. It may have to go up. I mean, the expenses of the programmers and the hosting and all that it's exorbitant, frankly. So to do it, we're going to need continuing support and resources, or we'd have to shut the website down. Just like Wikipedia asks for donation and stuff. You can't do this unless you have someone either underwriting all the costs, or you have to put a paywall up where people pay a monthly fee, which I don't want to do. So everyone listening, if you want all this stuff for free, you need to help us because there are no free lunches. I'm a retired doctor. We don't have the ability to just underwrite hundreds of thousands of dollars in ongoing expenses for something like this out of what, you know?
Right.
So that's something we're going to need help from everyone who actually wants to see this available to every man, woman, and child on planet Earth, really. Of course, the more people who use the archive, the more expensive it'll be because you get billed from the cloud, you know, the hosting of all this and the usage. So this is all something we're looking at. We're hoping my aspiration, and this is my New Year's resolution, is to find a way to get all this out in front of the people early in 2024 for free, where there's no paywall. You know, it'd be like getting on our YouTube channel and you just look at it. Except in this case, it's everything. It's this enormous amount of material. So we hope people will support that effort. When you hear from us, sign up at our website, which should be linked here, so we can send you information about this crowdfunding. And if you want to join us at our retreat center, it's probably going to be later in February for this week. It will be hunkered down in the mountains of Virginia near the Omni Homestead.
Beautiful area.
And not great for going out at night that time of year, but we're going to be focused on this. And at least we have a hot tub. But under the stars at
Yes.
night, you can do that if
Famous
the
hot tub.
temperature is 101 degrees. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and the Thomas Jefferson's hot springs are 2 minutes
Oh,
from
yeah.
that. So and those are amazing. But I hope that what we can do is that as early 2024 comes out, have this site available in its kind of raw data form, then keep improving and adding to it with these modules and triage, but also create more and more information. We're going to be asking the public, maybe your grandfather, and when he passed away, you found top secret documents or whatever, or it's a new witness comes forward, or a photograph, or someone who's been in a new site we don't know about. So as information comes in that we will solicit from the public, we will look at those, vet it, see if it's legit, and then include it, right?
Right.
So
Do you
that
think,
it's going to be a growing, look at this as a living, breathing, growing body of intelligence that's not at the CIA or in an underground vault or a SCIF vault,
right.
but available to the whole public.
How do you think this will impact people on the Hill? Do you think they'll read this? Do you think this will enlighten a huge number of them?
The big problem with members, and look, I'm this way, you know me. If someone sends me a 5-page thing, I turn it over to my assistant and say, turn it into 3 sentences. I don't have time. All right. So I understand how busy they are. And I understand that if you're an executive or senator or whatever, you can't go spend thousands of hours going through this. This is why curating the triage and rank ordering which documents, which cases are most important, and creating these briefing modules that tie it together, that would make it more usable. And for the public and journalists, I've had some big mainstream journalists contact me and say, we'd like to have access to that. But even for that, they're not going to be able to spend thousands of hours going through all that content and making sense of it.
Right.
So, it's going to be a process. It's going to be a very heavy lift on my part, frankly, to do that, because that phase of it isn't scanning and programming and putting in categories. But it has to be done. But that's going to be a arduous task that's coming up in 2024. But as we do it, and we'll just keep adding modules.
Right.
So what we don't want to do is delay for a year or two longer access by the world. But I'm just warning people, it's going to be searchable, but there are a lot of refinements still going to have to happen. And we need your help with that. I mean, we're going to need funding help and all kinds of help.
Pretty exciting stuff, Dr. Greer. Pretty
It
exciting
is.
stuff. I mean, this is going to be like a master's or a doctorate course in the history of people, of ETs and contact, really, for the world.
Well, and
Really, for this planet.
there's huge sections on it, thousands of pages on the technologies and patents and devices and all kinds of material. I mean, people's eyes are going to just, you don't have enough years left in most people's life to go through it all, which is why, however, if you say, I want to know whatever is in this archive about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, you'll be able to go Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and it will aggregate across all categories and the whole archive, everything, whether it's a whistleblower testimony, a document, a schematic, a crash retrieval case that was taken there, it would all go populated. Isn't that cool?
Right. This is, and the information, I was amazed at the breadth of the time span of this information. This isn't just the last 30 years that you've been working on this. Some of this stuff goes back to, over 100 years ago. You've got documents in there that go way back. This gives a complete and utter history and magnifying glass of some of these things, really, some of these subjects.
There's a whole file on that we got from someone whose grandmother had been at Los Alamos with the first atomic bomb, and then at Roswell when that happened. And when they were cleaning out her things, out of a book fell a photograph of a extraterrestrial body being dissected on a table in the 1920s that apparently were brought in from a prior acquisition of an ET so that when Roswell happened, they would have some comparative anatomy. And that's going to be in there. I mean, it's an enormous amount of material that most people on Earth have never conceived exist.
Right.
But a part of it also is, I think that we're at a point where all this is going to come out, and there needs to be a source that has curated legitimate material, since there's so much not legitimate material.
Right.
And I am getting older. I mean, I'm 68. You know, I could drop dead tomorrow. I could be killed tomorrow. So, I mean, I kind of feel like, I won't say who it is, but a man whose grandfather was an extremely famous artist who was good friends with Picasso. He had created this archive for his father and for his grandfather, who was already dead, and all his junk was scattered all over the four corners of the earth. And it took him forever. And I said, well, I don't want that to happen. So he brought up to me in 2016, he says, who's your archivist? Where's your I said,
I remember. I
said,
remember
it's in
that.
a bunch of boxes scattered all over. And so, Sandy, it was good that he said that to me, because it sort of triggered that should be done. And then when the Senate Intelligence Committee folks and the House Oversight and the military office for the White House all approached me in the last 2 or 3 years, I thought, we really need to do this. I mean, otherwise, it's been exhausting and expensive and sort of a very complex task. But once it's done, it will be available to everybody, including the investigators in Congress and law enforcement.
I remember being in a car going out to Joshua Tree with you.
Mm-hmm.
We were going out one night to do a CE5 with a group of 30 people. Or maybe it
Yeah.
was the 𝗦𝗲𝗍. I believe it was the 𝗦𝗍𝗍 trip.
It was, yeah.
It was, and you said, well, I've got all this stuff in my cellar, and all this stuff there needs to be an archive of this. And I was like, well, how much is in there? And you were like, oh, 40, 50 boxes. And I was like, oh, I mean, the idea,
More than that.
yeah, it's way more than that. It just seemed like an overwhelming job. But I mean, it was clear that you were saying this needs to get done.
Well, let me be blunt as we wrap up. This is the disclosure.
Yeah.
There won't be a hearing or anything out of the U.S. government that will have more content than this. The only thing that would have more definitive proof, evidence, and content would be if the secret government programs capitulate and release it, or law enforcement seizes it and releases it. Short of that, this absolutely will be the largest disclosure in history on the subject. So the disclosure you're all asking for, we're about to drop that to the public.
Yeah, definitely a buckle up moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't wait, and I'm so happy that this got done. And thank you, Dr. Greer. I mean, the world does not realize, you know, it is such an enormous job that you have undertaken for all these years. And I've told you before, you definitely have job security. I don't know that anybody else wanted your job, really.
No, they don't. I tried to give it away.
Yeah.
Oh, trust me, I would love to be able to step off this stage. I mean, everyone thinks that this is something that's some hobby. No, it's blood, sweat, and tears, as you know. So
this is probably one of the most important things that's really been done for the civilization.
Yeah, and and it's going to be, my goal is that if everyone contributes, so we can keep it free, which I hope we can, and continue to expand it, improve it. It's just going to be this snowball effect of disclosure through an openly available site.
Yeah, right. And somebody's asked recently, they said, I think they maybe even asked you, when did you think that, when was the last time that you thought something was really this transparent happened? And really, actually, to me, for this country, it actually was back in 1776 was the last time anything actually came out like that.
Yeah, it's a revolution, but a peaceful one, we hope. And so peace in the new year, and hopefully we get our act together as a species and make a peaceful contact initiative. Our goal always has been to disclose the information and get the world community to make peaceful contact with these civilizations, instead of mismanaging it through the myopia of secret military programs. That was the mistake. You know, as you know, when I was with Senator Barry Goldwater, before he passed away, and you know, he ran for president as a Republican in the 60s against Lyndon Johnson, and he had found out about this issue but was denied access and threatened. And when I was in his living room in Paradise Valley in Scottsdale some years ago, you know, he said, you know, this is his language, not mine. He said, it was a goddamn mistake then and a goddamn mistake now. This was ever handled this way and kept secret. And so it allowed an enormous problem to develop that just has become a huge crisis. And people don't know that. Most people don't realize the crisis it's created, i.e., climate change, poverty, pollution, oceans dying. People go, what's that got to do with extraterrestrials? I said, because the technologies that are behind how those things move. But then you add into it the other problem, and that is we're about to push through a red line in outer space, targeting these craft. And I think their patience has a limit. I think these civilizations from other star systems, they're not going to let us take that too much further before that our capability is stopped. But they're stopping that capability they know would be terrible because it would be spun by the media and by the UFO community and the military industrial complex as alien invasion, right? So the people always ask me, very smart people, why don't they just land and fix this? I said, because it would, A, they'd be blown out of the sky with these EMP scalar weapons, and B, it would be portrayed by the spin meisters as Alien Invasion Week on the History Channel. It would be Independence Day, right? Like that movie with Will Smith. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place. The ETs need good humans to fix this. This is our planet. We need to fix it. And if we get this to a certain level where it's fixed, there'll be open contact beginning to evolve. That will be peaceful. And the technologies that can be used for peaceful purposes and not weapons can come out. It'll be a new world. And it's like the ETs. Yeah, it's what the ET said to Colonel Corso when, you know, that craft landed out at White Sands and the ET asked him to help stop these tracking and targeting them. And Colonel Corso, you know, he said, what's in it for me? And the ET said, a new world if you can take it. So that was 1956. You do the math. You know,
imagine
it's time.
Right, it's time. Just imagine what we could learn from them about consciousness.
Oh, everything though. I mean,
everything.
The universe, consciousness, technologies, healing. You know, yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's just we're really living, you know, half a step out of the jungle as a civilization because of all these wondrous and incredible technologies that have been withheld from humanity. And so the peace dividend, let's call it, of bringing this out and doing it peacefully and then making peaceful contact would completely transform our civilization. In 20 years, you wouldn't recognize it from today. You would not recognize it.
Well, I hope that happens.
Yeah.
I hope
Yep.
that.
Well, here's to that.
Thank you, Dr.
We'll
Greer.
raise a glass and a toast to that on New Year's Eve.
Yep, and also, this will be available for people on the 31st, right? This will be.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, on New Year's Eve.
So happy New Year's.
Happy New Year's. Thank you,
All right.
Dr.
All right.
Thank you for all your 30 years of work also. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're an angel. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.